I met Dustin at the gym where I worked the front desk. He was 27. I was 24, and he had this solid, dependable thing going for him that I found attractive, not flashy attractive, but the kind of attractive that pays bills and doesn't mess around. He'd come in every morning at 6, nod at me with this shy smile, and I could tell he was working up the courage to actually talk to me beyond good morning and gym small talk. When he finally asked me out, I wasn't surprised. I'd been giving him just enough encouragement to keep him interested without seeming too eager. The first date was at some food truck festival downtown, which honestly wasn't what I had in mind for a first date. But Dustin seemed so proud of himself for picking something fun and casual that I went along with it. He was sweet. I'll give him that. Paid for everything. Asked questions about my life. Seemed genuinely interested in my answers. And he had his own construction business, which meant stability and potential. The dating phase was comfortable. Dustin was generous without being showy about it. Reliable without being boring. And he clearly adored me. He'd pick me up for dates in his clean truck, take me to nice restaurants, and never made me feel like I had to worry about money or logistics or any of that exhausting stuff that comes with dating guys your own age. When I mentioned wanting to get certified as a personal trainer, he offered to pay for the courses without me even asking. That's when I knew he was serious about us. And that's when I started getting serious about him too. 2 years in, he proposed at the same food truck festival where we'd had our first date. It was sweet in that predictable way that Dustin specialized in, and the ring was exactly what I'd hinted at during our casual walks past jewelry stores. I said yes because of course I said yes. Dustin was everything I'd been looking for. Stable, generous, completely devoted to me, and ready to build a life together. Planning the wedding was where I really got to see how much Dustin was willing to invest in us. My parents claimed they were tight on money, which was probably true but also convenient. So Dustin stepped up and covered most of the expenses. He never complained, never made me feel guilty about the costs, just wanted me to have the wedding I'd dreamed about. We kept it small, a garden ceremony with close family and friends, but it was perfect. I felt like a queen that day, watching Dustin's face as I walked down the aisle, knowing that I'd landed exactly the kind of man who would take care of me. The honeymoon was lovely, and moving into our house on the edge of town felt like the natural next step. Dustin had picked a place with room to grow, he said, though we hadn't really talked seriously about kids yet. The first few months were good. We fell into routines, learned how to live together as a married couple, and I enjoyed the feeling of being settled and secure. But by the end of our first year, some of the shine was starting to wear off. Dustin's work schedule meant he was up at 5:30 every morning, home by 6 if he was lucky, and often too tired for much conversation or excitement. We'd have dinner, watch TV, and go to bed early so he could do it all over again the next day. When I tried to talk to him about maybe mixing things up or planning more date nights, he'd remind me that his business was still growing and he needed to work hard now so we could have more freedom later. Logical, sure, but not exactly thrilling for someone who was used to a little more excitement in her life. We started having fights about his emotional availability, or lack thereof. I'd try to tell him I needed more attention, more romance, more of the fun we used to have when we were dating, and he'd get defensive about how hard he was working for our future. It felt like he thought providing for me financially was the same thing as actually being present in our marriage, and I couldn't make him understand that I needed more than just security. During our second year of marriage, I started spending more time on my phone. Social media became a way to connect with people who actually seemed interested in having fun, and I made friends with some girls who knew how to enjoy themselves. They'd invite me out for girls' nights, and I'd come home feeling alive in a way that I hadn't felt in months. Dustin would ask about my nights out, but in this polite, distant way that made it clear he wasn't really listening to my answers. The girls' nights turned into overnight trips sometimes, especially when we'd go somewhere that was too far to drive back from safely. Dustin would express concern, but he'd frame it as worry about my safety rather than actually missing me, which just proved my point about how disconnected we'd become. I started to feel like he saw me as another responsibility to manage rather than as his wife who deserved his attention and interest. The situation with my sister's spa day was a perfect example of how suffocating things had gotten. I told Dustin I was going with my sister for a relaxing day at the spa, but really I went bar hopping with friends 2 towns over. We had such a great time, dancing and laughing and feeling free, and I came home refreshed in a way that no actual spa day could have accomplished. But then some mutual friend posted a group selfie from the bar, and Dustin saw it and confronted me about lying to him, instead of understanding that I'd only lied because I knew he'd make a big deal about a harmless night out. He got all hurt and suspicious. He wanted to know why I'd felt the need to lie, what else I might be hiding, whether I was happy in our marriage. The questions felt invasive and controlling, like he was trying to manage my social life instead of trusting me to make my own decisions. I told him he was being insecure and that his reaction was exactly why I hadn't been completely honest in the first place. When the Miami trip came up, I was so ready for it. 5 days with just the girls. Somewhere warm and fun, with no early morning wake-ups or boring conversations about construction projects or budget planning. Dustin wasn't thrilled about the idea, but he couldn't exactly forbid me from going without looking like a complete control freak. I could tell he wanted to, though, which just made me more determined to go and have the time of my life. Miami was exactly what I needed. We stayed at a beautiful hotel, spent our days by the pool, and our nights exploring the city. The second night, we went to this incredible club where the music was amazing and everyone was beautiful and confident and alive. I felt like myself again for the first time in months, dancing and laughing and remembering what it felt like to be wanted by people who didn't take me for granted. That's when I met him. I don't even remember his name now, but he was charming and funny and paid attention to me in a way that made me feel electric. We talked and danced, and he made me feel beautiful and interesting and worth pursuing. When he kissed me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, that flutter of excitement, that rush of being desired by someone who chose me out of everyone else in the room. One thing led to another. And yes, I went back to his hotel with him. And yes, I was still wearing my wedding ring. But in that moment, it felt like a piece of jewelry from another life. I felt free and alive and I wasn't going to let guilt about Dustin's feelings ruin the first real excitement I'd had since before we got married. The girls took pictures throughout the night, including some of me in the sky, and I was laughing and giving peace signs because I felt genuinely happy. I knew it was just a Miami thing, a fun memory that would make me smile when I was back to my regular life. It didn't mean anything beyond that moment, and it wasn't going to hurt anyone because Dustin would never know and it would never happen again. I deserved to feel wanted and exciting and alive, especially after spending 2 years being taken for granted by someone who seemed to think marriage meant he could stop making any effort. Coming back home was harder than I'd expected. Dustin seemed so small and predictable after the energy and excitement of Miami, and I found myself feeling irritated by things that hadn't bothered me before. His morning routine seemed even more tedious, his conversation even more limited to work and practical concerns. I tried to settle back into our regular life, but everything felt gray and suffocating after those 5 days of freedom. I must have been acting differently because Dustin kept asking if I was okay, if something had happened on the trip, if we needed to talk about anything. His concern felt clingy and annoying, and I found myself snapping at him more than usual. I just needed some space to readjust to being home, but he couldn't even give me that without making it about his insecurities. A week after I got back, Dustin's whole demeanor changed. He came home from work with this serious, determined expression that I'd never seen before, and he asked me to sit down because we needed to talk. Then he pulled out printed screenshots, actual printed paper, of pictures from Miami, including the ones of me with that guy at the club. "Explain this," he said, like he was conducting some kind of interrogation. My first reaction was shock that he'd somehow gotten these pictures, followed immediately by anger that he was confronting me like I was a criminal instead of his wife who deserved the benefit of the doubt. But the evidence was right there in front of me, so I told him the truth. "I'm sorry," I said. "It didn't mean anything," which was completely true. It had been one night of fun that had nothing to do with my real life or my marriage. But instead of understanding that, Dustin acted like I'd committed some unforgivable crime. I tried to explain that I'd been feeling neglected and unappreciated, that the spark in our marriage had died, that I just wanted to feel wanted and attractive again. These were legitimate issues that we should have been discussing months ago, but he'd been too wrapped up in his work and his routines to notice that his wife was unhappy. "So you flew across the country to hook up with a stranger and came back wearing your ring, like nothing happened?" he asked. I just nodded because what else was there to say? He was determined to make this into some huge betrayal instead of seeing it as a symptom of the problems we'd been having for over a year. I'd been trying to tell him I was unhappy, trying to get his attention, trying to bring some life back into our marriage, and he'd ignored every signal. But now suddenly he was paying attention, when it was too late to fix anything. That same night, Dustin packed a bag and left. Just like that. No discussion about counseling or working through our problems or trying to understand why this had happened. He went to stay with his brother, and I was left alone in our house, trying to process the fact that my husband had just walked out on our marriage over one mistake. The next morning, he called a lawyer? I know because divorce papers showed up at the house within a week, like he'd already made up his mind that our 3-year relationship was disposable. No attempt at reconciliation. No willingness to fight for what we'd built together. Just immediate legal action like I was some kind of business problem that needed to be resolved efficiently. The whole thing was devastating. But what made it worse was how everyone else reacted. Melissa, who had been right there with me in Miami, who had taken some of those pictures herself, suddenly developed a conscience and decided she couldn't be friends with me anymore. She acted like she was taking some moral high ground, when really she was just protecting her own reputation by distancing herself from me. Other friends started avoiding me too, either because they'd heard Dustin's version of events or because they didn't want to get involved in the drama. It was like everyone forgot that I was the one whose husband had abandoned her, that I was the one dealing with divorce papers and having to figure out how to rebuild my entire life. But sure, let's all feel sorry for Dustin, who couldn't handle being married to someone with actual needs and desires. I tried reaching out to him a few times after the divorce was finalized. The first time was just a casual check-in message, seeing how he was doing, keeping the door open for communication. When he didn't respond, I sent a longer message explaining my perspective and apologizing for hurting him, but also trying to help him understand why I'd felt so disconnected from our marriage. I thought if he could see the situation from my point of view, maybe we could at least end things on a better note. But he never responded to either message. Complete radio silence, like our entire relationship had never happened. Meanwhile, I started seeing social media posts about how well his business was doing, how he was going to therapy and joining some men's group, how he was planning to buy land and build a cabin. Everyone was so proud of him for moving on and bettering himself, like he was some kind of hero for walking away from his marriage instead of fighting for it. It's been over a year now, and I still can't believe how everything fell apart so quickly. One night of fun, one moment of feeling alive and wanted, and suddenly I'm the villain in everyone's story. Dustin gets to be the wronged husband who's rebuilding his life, and I get to be the cheating wife who destroyed a good marriage. Never mind that the marriage had been dying long before Miami. Never mind that I'd been trying to communicate my unhappiness for months. Never mind that he'd been taking me for granted and treating our relationship like an obligation instead of a partnership. I lost my husband, my home, most of my friends, and my entire social circle because I made one mistake during a rough patch in my marriage. Meanwhile, Dustin gets sympathy and support and gets to start over with a clean slate, like he bears no responsibility for the problems that led to that night in Miami in the first place. The whole situation is completely unfair, but apparently no one wants to hear my side of the story. They've all decided I'm the bad guy, and nothing I say is going to change their minds. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Melissa had minded her own business, if those pictures had never made it back to Dustin, if I'd been able to keep that one night as just a private memory that helped me get through the rough patch in my marriage. We might have worked through our problems eventually. I might have been able to help him understand what I needed from him, and he might have been willing to put in more effort to make me happy. But we'll never know now, because everyone decided that one night of poor judgment was more important than 3 years of history together. The worst part is that I can see how much better Dustin's life has gotten since he left me. His business is thriving. He's lost weight. He seems confident and happy in all his pictures. It's like removing me from his life was the best thing that ever happened to him, which is a pretty harsh thing to realize about someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally. But I guess unconditional love has conditions after all. And I found out exactly where his line was. I'm trying to rebuild my own life now. But it's not easy when everyone has already decided what kind of person you are based on one night out of your entire life. I made a mistake, sure. But I was also a wife who felt ignored and unappreciated by a husband who thought providing financial security was the same thing as providing emotional intimacy. I was a young woman who wanted to feel alive and exciting and desired, and I found those feelings in the wrong place at the wrong time. But apparently that's not a story anyone wants to hear. They want the simple version where I'm the cheating wife and Dustin is the innocent victim, where there's a clear villain and a clear hero. Real life is more complicated than that. But complicated doesn't make for a satisfying story, I guess. So I'll be the villain in their version, and Dustin will be the hero in his. And the truth about what our marriage was really like will just disappear, because it doesn't fit the narrative everyone wants to believe.